The sound of clashing weapons filled the air as Zyra, the alien warrior, fought with everything she had. Her body was covered in blood, her muscles aching, but she wouldn't stop. But she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when her people were depending on her. Zyra had been fighting for hours. Her alien enemies surrounded her, their weapons glinting under the strange light of the alien planet's twin suns. The sky above was a deep red, almost as if it could sense the violence happening below. Her hands were slick with sweat, and the weight of her weapon felt heavier with every swing. She knew she was outnumbered. She knew the end was near, but still, she kept fighting. It was what she had been trained to do since she was young, fighting for her people, for the survival of her planet. She had no choice but to win. Failure was not an option. Her sword slashed through the air, cutting down one enemy after another. Her strength was unmatched, and her training was perfect. But with every victory, it felt like more of her strength drained away. The energy in her body was fading. The cuts on her skin, the bruises, the pain of it mattered. She couldn't stop, not yet. But then, a sharp pain shot through her side. Zyra gasped, stumbling backward. One of her enemies had struck a blow that pierced her armor. She tried to move, to fight back, but her legs were growing weak. Her vision blurred as she looked down at the wound. Blood seeped from the hole, staining the ground beneath her. She fell to her knees. The weight of her body finally too much to bear. The battle raged on around her, but Zyra's strength was gone. Her vision darkened, and for the first time in her life she felt the cold grip of death closing in. This was it. She had failed. She'd fought as hard as she could, but in the end, it wasn't enough. Her people would lose, and she would never be able to protect them. The warrior who had once been unstoppable was now nothing more than a dying soldier. Zyra closed her eyes, ready to give in to the darkness. She could feel her breath slowing, her heartbeat fading. She thought about her home planet, her family, the ones she had left behind. She wished she could have done more for them, wished she could have made a difference. But there was no time. Left, the pain became distant, a whisper in the back of her mind. The weight of her body seemed to float away. As she let go, her mind surrendering to the peaceful emptiness that was taking over. Zyra's last thought was of her people, of the world. She was leaving behind. She had failed them. But at least she had fought until the very end, and then everything went silent. Ethan had never expected to find an alien warrior in his backyard. It was early morning, and he was out collecting supplies from the forest when he stumbled upon something strange. He was used to strange things on this planet. After all, it was a far-off world away from Earth, and there was no telling what could happen out here. But this was different. As he walked along a path he had taken countless times, he noticed something unusual in the distance. A figure lay motionless, sprawled across the ground near a large rock. The figure was covered in dark reddish armor and appeared to be humanoid, but Ethan couldn't tell much more than that. His heart raced. Was it a wild animal? A predator? Or something else? He cautiously approached, ready to run if necessary. But as he got closer, he realized this was no animal. It was a woman, but not like any woman he had ever seen. Her skin was a shade of greenish-gray, her hair a strange color that shimmered like liquid silver. Blood stained her armor, and she looked lifeless. Ethan stopped in his tracks, unsure of what to do. He had no experience with alien species. He had come to this planet years ago as a part of an exploration mission, and now here he was, alone. Without any kind of backup or knowledge of what to do in a situation like this, he took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. This wasn't just any ordinary being. She was different, and he had no idea how she ended up here. But he couldn't just leave her to die, could he? His mind raced. What if she was dangerous? What if she had enemies nearby? But then he thought of his own moral compass. No matter who or what she was, she needed help. Ethan knelt down beside her, checking her pulse. It was weak, but still there. Without thinking too much about the consequences, he gently lifted her into his arms. She was heavier than she looked, and the armor she wore didn't help. But Ethan was determined. He had the strength and the will. To get her back to his shelter, The journey was long, and with every step, he grew more anxious. He didn't know if she would survive. He didn't know if he was doing the right thing. But he knew he couldn't just leave her. She was alone, in pain, and helpless. When he finally reached his home, a small cabin on the outskirts of the forest, he carefully laid her down on his bed, immediately got to work trying to stop the bleeding and clean the wounds. His hands shook as he moved with purpose, unsure of the proper methods, but determined to save her life. He had no medical training, but he used everything he could find: basic bandages, old medicine, anything he could use to ease her suffering. As he worked, he couldn't help but wonder who she was. What was she doing here? Why was she so far from whatever planet she called home? And, more importantly, who was she fighting? Her injuries told the story of a brutal battle, one that she had barely survived. After what felt like hours, he finished bandaging her wounds. He stepped back, exhausted, and watched her carefully. Her chest rose and fell slowly, but she hadn't woken up yet. Ethan wasn't sure what to do next. Should he leave? Would it be safer to run? Should he stay and wait? He had no answers, but he stayed. He didn't want to abandon her. There was something about her, something deep within her eyes, even when she was unconscious, that told him she wasn't just a warrior. She was someone who had been through so much. He couldn't help but feel a strange pull, as though fate had led him here to find her. Hours passed, and he grew more and more restless. The night came, but he didn't sleep. Instead, he sat beside her, watching her, wondering who she was and why she had appeared in his life. He had always felt alone on this strange world. Perhaps it was his isolation that made him feel such a connection to this mysterious woman. Around midnight, just as he was beginning to drift off to sleep in the chair beside her, something shifted. He was jolted awake by the faintest sound of her breathing becoming steadier. Her fingers twitched, and then, slowly, she began to open her eyes. Ethan froze. Was she awake? Was she going to attack him? He had no idea what to expect. He stayed still, waiting, his heart pounding in his chest. The alien woman's eyes fluttered open. Da-da-da-da. And for a moment, she stared at the ceiling, confused and disoriented. She blinked a few times, and then her gaze shifted to Ethan. Her voice was low, rough, as if she hadn't spoken in days. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice thick with an accent he couldn't quite place. Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out at first. He was unsure of what to say. "You're safe," he finally managed to say. "I found you out there. You were hurt, you were dying, but I couldn't leave you." The woman's eyes narrowed, and for a moment he thought she might get angry. But instead, her expression softened. "You ... saved me?" Ethan nodded, unsure of what else to say. He had no experience with alien languages or customs, but he hoped his words would be enough. "I couldn't just leave you." The woman blinked. Again, and slowly, she sat up, wincing as she moved. She looked down at her wounds, her face unreadable. "I should have died," she muttered. Ethan didn't know how to respond to that. He couldn't imagine what she had been through, but he was sure of one thing. He had made the right choice. He had saved her life. As she looked at him again, her eyes met his, and something passed between them, a connection, fragile but real. Ethan wasn't sure what would happen next. He had no idea where this strange new bond would take them. But one thing was certain. Life on this planet had just become far more complicated than he could have ever imagined. Zira slowly blinked her eyes open, confused. Her mind was cloudy, and her body felt heavier than it should. The first thing she noticed was the smell fresh, clean, and unlike anything she'd ever encountered. It was the scent of Earth, a place she had never visited, a planet that had no part in her war. But here, in this strange place, it was all around her. She tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in her side made her stop. Her body was stiff, and the wounds from her battle were still there, though they didn't hurt as much as before. She glanced down and saw the bandages wrapped around her body, her armor removed, placed by simple cloths that felt soft against her skin. Zyra tried to remember what had happened. The battle, the enemies, the last blow. She had been dying. That was the last thing she remembered. But now, she was alive. Her chest rose and fell slowly, her breathing steady. Though she couldn't remember how she had gotten here, the room around her was simple but comfortable. It was unlike any place she had ever seen. The walls were made of smooth wood, and the soft light of a low-hanging lamp bathed everything in a warm, golden glow. She could hear the faint sounds of the forest outside through a crack in the window, the chirping of strange birds and the rustling of leaves in the wind. Where was she? How had she gotten here? Who had helped her? Zira turned her head and found a human sitting in a chair beside her. He looked tired, but he was watching her carefully, his eyes filled with concern. She could see the tension in his posture, as though he was unsure how she would react. Her mind raced. Had this human captured her? Was he part of the enemy? There was something different about him. She didn't feel threatened. Not in the way she had felt with her enemies. He seemed kind. His eyes were soft, not filled with malice or fear. He looked at her like she was not a monster, not an alien to be feared. He had saved her. Zira's heart raced at the thought. He'd found her when she was on the brink of death and brought her here to this place. She had never expected such kindness, especially from a human. The human noticed her movement and spoke softly, as though afraid to startle her. "You're awake," he said, his voice calm and steady. "How do you feel?" Zira hesitated for a moment, her throat dry, and then whispered, "What is this place?" "This is my home," the human replied gently. "I found you out there, in the woods. You were badly injured. I couldn't just leave you." His words were simple, but they carried meaning. It saved her, not because of some duty or obligation, but because he had seen her suffering and couldn't ignore it. She took a deep breath, trying to gather her thoughts. "You saved me?" she asked, still unsure. The human nodded. "Yes, I did. I couldn't just leave you to die out there. You didn't deserve that." Zira felt a strange mix of emotions swirl inside her: surprise, confusion, and a deep sense of gratitude. She had fought so many battles, faced so many enemies, but never had anyone done something like this for her. She had always been the one fighting for survival. No one had ever fought for her. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The human's eyes softened, and he looked away for a moment, as if thinking about his answer. When he spoke again, his voice was steady but warm, because it was the right thing to do. No one should die alone, not like that. I couldn't just let you go without doing what I could. Zira was silent for a long time, the weight of his words sinking in. She had been ready to die in that battle. It had been a part of her life, fighting, surviving, never questioning the cause. But here, in this simple room, with a human who had no reason to care for her, everything felt different. The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful in a way that Zira hadn't known in years. The only sound was the gentle rustling of the leaves outside the window. She turned her gaze back to the human, his face calm, but filled with something she couldn't quite place: sympathy, perhaps. Or was it pity? But even if it was pity, it was a kind of pity she had never experienced before. "My name is Ethan," the human said after a moment, breaking the silence. I don't know what you've been through, but I'm here now, and I won't hurt you." Zira nodded slowly. "I am Zira," she said, her voice a little stronger now. "I was once a warrior. I fought for my planet, but I failed." Her words felt like a weight, heavy and unspoken, for so long. "I died in battle." "You didn't die," Ethan replied gently. "We're alive now." Zira closed her eyes for a moment, letting the words sink in. She had died, and yet here she was, breathing, alive, and cared for. She didn't know how to handle it. She had always been strong, self-reliant, never asking for help. Now she had no choice but to accept it. "What now?" she asked, opening her eyes again and meeting his gaze. "What am I supposed to do?" Ethan looked thoughtful for a moment. "That's up to you, Zira. You're safe here. You don't have to fight anymore if you don't want to. You can rest. You can heal." Zira felt something stir inside her. She had spent her entire life fighting, training, never allowing herself to stop. But now, with everything that had happened, she wasn't sure what to do next. For the first time in her life, she considered something other than the war. Maybe she could be something else. As Ethan stood up and moved toward the door, Zira watched him, her thoughts heavy with the new reality that had unfolded before her. Her life had taken a turn she hadn't expected, and though she didn't yet know what the future would hold, she was sure of one thing. It was no longer about surviving a war. It was about learning to live again. The days passed slowly, but they were peaceful. Zyra's body healed as time went on, her strength returning bit by bit. Ethan cared for her, helping her through the pain and providing whatever she needed. He showed her the ways of his world, the plants, the animals, and even the stars that dotted the night sky. He taught her about the simple pleasures of life that she had never known. But even as she grew stronger, the memories of her past kept pushing their way to the surface. The battles, the war, the endless fight for survival. One evening, as they sat together by the small fire in Ethan's cabin, Zyra found herself staring into the flames. The fire crackled softly, and the warmth from it was soothing. But her thoughts were far away, lost in the echoes of the past. The flickering light seemed to bring her memories alive. Ethan noticed the change in her. He knew that she wasn't fully healed, not just physically but emotionally too. He had seen the haunted look in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. And he knew that she needed to talk about it. "Zyra," he began softly. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to, but I can see it. The pain in your eyes. What happened? What kind of life did you live before?" Zyra stayed silent for a long time, her eyes fixed on the fire. She was afraid of what would happen if she spoke of her past. It wasn't just the violence, the endless killing. It was the guilt, the feeling that she had failed her people. She had never done enough. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke, her voice low and quiet, as if the words were hard to pull from her chest. "I was a soldier," she said, her gaze never leaving the flames. "I fought for my planet. I was trained to be a warrior. We were losing the war, and I was the last hope. I thought I could save them. I thought I could stop the destruction, but She paused, her throat tightening as the memories flooded back. The screams of her comrades, the endless bloodshed, the planets burning. She had been one of the best. She had fought with everything she had, but nothing was enough. "I failed," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I couldn't protect them. I couldn't protect my people." Ethan sat quietly beside her, listening without interrupting. Could hear the pain in her words, the weight of the years of battle and loss. He had no idea what it was like to carry that kind of burden, but he knew how much it hurt her. "You did your best," Ethan said softly, his voice steady and kind. Sometimes, sometimes that's all we can do. You gave everything for them. You fought with everything you had. That's not failure. That's courage." Zyra looked at him, her eyes filled with doubt. She wasn't sure if she could believe his words. Her whole life had been about fighting, about winning, about being strong. And yet, in the end, she had lost. Her people were still in danger. The war wasn't over. "I don't know if I can forgive myself," she said quietly. "I don't know if I can live with the things I've done, the people I've hurt." Ethan reached out, gently placing his hand on hers. The touch was warm, comforting. "I don't think forgiveness is something you can force. It's not something you do all at once. But maybe it's something you can find piece by piece. You don't have to carry everything on your own." Zyra looked down at their hands, her mind racing. She had never allowed herself to think of forgiveness before. It had never seemed like an option. She had always believed that if she failed, there was no way to fix it, no way to make it right. But maybe Ethan was right. Maybe it wasn't about fixing everything all at once. Maybe it was about finding peace with what had happened and learning to live with it. "I don't know how." "To live without fighting," she said, her voice filled with uncertainty. "It's all I've ever known." Ethan gave her a small smile, though there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "You don't have to fight anymore, Zyra. Not unless you choose to. There's more to life than war. There's single quotes, and love, and moments like this." Zyra looked at him, his words echoing in her mind. She had never known a life without violence, without constant battle. But now, sitting here with him, she realized that maybe there was something else. Maybe, for the first time, she could start to live for herself and not just for the war, but it wasn't easy. The path forward felt uncertain, and the scars of her past were deep. Still, she felt something stir inside her, a small, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, she could find a new way to live. For the next few days, Zyra continued to recover, her body slowly regaining its strength. But it wasn't just her body that was healing. The walls she had built around her heart, the walls she had used to keep herself from feeling anything, began to crack. It was a slow process, and she was still uncertain of what it meant for her future. She spent more time with Ethan, learning about his life and the world he lived on. She came to appreciate the small, simple moments, the sounds of the birds in the morning, the way the sun painted the sky at dusk, and the way Ethan treated her with kindness and respect. She was starting to realize that there was more to life than just surviving. There was beauty, there was hope, and there was a chance to be more than a warrior as the days went on. Zyra found herself questioning the life she had lived, the battles she had fought, and the reasons behind them. She still wasn't sure what her future held, but for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that it didn't have to be defined by war. Zyra had only just begun to understand the peaceful life Ethan had shown her when the quiet was shattered. It started with a strange feeling, a cold shiver running down her spine in the middle of the night. Her instincts trained for years in battle were still sharp, even if her body was healing. She had learned to trust those feelings, and now they were telling her that something was wrong. Ethan was already awake, sitting by the fire, his face tense. Look in his eyes told Zyra that he had felt it too. He had known something was coming. "Zyra," Ethan said quietly, his voice filled with concern, "I think we're not alone. I've been hearing strange noises from the forest for the past few hours. Something's out there." Zyra stood up, her body aching but ready. "I've heard them too," she said. "We need to leave now." Ethan looked at her, his eyes filled with hesitation. "What if it's just an animal? What if we're just overreacting?" "It's not an animal," Zyra said firmly. Her voice was filled with the authority of a warrior who had faced real danger. "I can feel it. Someone is coming." Before Ethan could respond, the ground beneath them trembled slightly, and the distant roar of engines filled the air. "Da!" Sound was unmistakable, spaceships. Zyra's heart sank. The enemies she had once fought in battle, the ones who had chased her to the brink of death, had followed her here. They had found her. Zyra moved swiftly, heading for the door. "They've come for me," she said, her voice a mixture of fear and anger. "I have to fight." "No," Ethan said, reaching out to stop her. "You don't have to fight anymore. You're safe here." Zyra shook her head, her eyes fierce. "I can't let them hurt you. I've already failed once." "Fail again." With those words, she grabbed the weapon that Ethan had hidden for her, an old rusty blade he had found on his travels. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Her body was still weak, but she had fought worse battles. She had to fight now, not just for herself, but for Ethan. The only person who had ever shown her kindness. Ethan tried to stop her again, but he knew it was no use. Zyra had made up her mind. She had been a soldier her entire life, and even now. In this strange world, the warrior inside her could not be ignored as they stepped outside. The dark sky was lit by the glow of the approaching ships. The forest around them was eerily quiet, as if it knew the danger that was closing in. Zyra's eyes scanned the horizon, her heart pounding in her chest. She could see the shapes of the enemy ships in the distance, their lights flashing like stars. They were getting closer fast. Zyra tightened her grip on her weapon, preparing for the worst. "Ethan," she said quietly, "I'm not asking you to fight. But if things go wrong, you need to run. You need to get to safety." Ethan nodded, his face pale. "I won't leave you," he said, his voice filled with determination. Zyra didn't have time to argue. The ships were almost upon them. In the distance, she could hear the engines of the enemy vessels roaring louder, their massive forms coming. "Into view, get ready," Zyra said, her voice cold and steady. The warrior within her had returned. She wasn't the same woman who had fought in countless battles. She wasn't the same woman who had failed her people. She was different now. She had something to protect. The first enemy ship touched down with a heavy thud, sending dust and debris flying into the air. The ground shook as more ships landed, their engines hissing as they powered down. Zyra's eyes narrowed. She could see the figures emerging from the ships, tall and armored, their movements precise and deadly. These were the soldiers she had once fought alongside the same ruthless warriors who had brought destruction to her planet. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stepped forward, ready to face them. She was outnumbered, but she didn't care. These soldiers didn't know what she had become. They didn't know that the woman they had left for dead was now stronger than ever. Ethan stood beside her, fear in his eyes, but he wasn't backing down. He had seen Zyra fight before, and he knew there was no stopping her now. The first enemy soldier raised his weapon, aiming at Zyra. Without hesitation, she moved, her body a blur of motion. The soldier's shot missed by inches as Zyra's blade cut through the air, striking him down with a swift and powerful blow. The remaining soldiers rushed forward, their weapons firing, but Zyra was faster. She dodged and weaved, her movements graceful yet deadly. Every strike, every blow, was calculated, precise. She was a warrior again. But as she fought, she couldn't help but notice something strange. These soldiers were not attacking with the same ferocity she remembered. They seemed hesitant, as if they didn't want to kill her. One of the soldiers stepped forward, his voice calm but urgent. "Zyra, stop. We don't want to fight you." She hesitated, her blade raised, unsure of how to react. The voice was familiar, one she hadn't heard in years. "Zyra, listen to me," the soldier said. "We're not your enemies anymore. The war is over." Zyra lowered her weapon slightly, her eyes narrowing. She recognized the voice now. It was Yarek, a former commander from her home planet. He had been one of her closest allies in the war. "Are you talking about?" Zyra demanded, her voice sharp with disbelief. "The war isn't over? You're here to kill me, just like the rest?" Yarek shook his head. "No, we were sent here to find you. We were wrong, Zyra. We made a mistake. The war ended because of what you did. You were right all along." Zyra's mind spun as the truth sank in. Her enemies weren't here to finish what they had started. They were here to acknowledge her victory. The war was over. She had won. But in that moment, she realized something even more important. The battle she had fought was not just about survival. It was about finding a new path, a new way of life. It was a path she would walk, not alone, but with the people. She had come to care about Ethan, and maybe even the soldiers who had once been her enemies. Zyra stood in the quiet of the forest, her body tired from the battle, but her heart feeling something different, something she hadn't expected. She had fought for so long, always struggling, always seeking victory in the chaos of war. But today, she realized that the true battle wasn't against her enemies. It was within herself. As the enemy soldiers lowered their weapons, Yarek approached her. His face was calm, but there was a sadness in his eyes. He had once been a leader, a warrior like her. Now he was something else, someone seeking peace, not destruction. "I never wanted it to end this way," Yarek said softly. "You were right. The war was wrong. We couldn't see it until it was too late. We were blinded by power and fear." Zyra didn't know how to respond. She'd spent so many years fighting for a cause that now felt distant and hollow. The idea of peace, something she had never imagined, seemed like a foreign concept. She had been raised to fight, to survive, and to never question the reasons behind the battles she fought. Now, that world was crumbling around her, and she was left to pick up the pieces. Ethan stood beside her, his eyes fixed on Yarek and the other soldiers. He could see the tension in Zyra's posture, the way she hesitated. But he also saw the spark of something else, the possibility of change. He reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to go back to that life, Zyra," Ethan said gently. "You've done enough. You've fought for so long. Now it's time for something new." Zyra looked at him, her expression softening. Ethan was right. She had given so much to the war, but now there was no reason to keep fighting. The world was different now. The people she had once considered enemies were no longer the enemy. It was time to move on. Yarick stepped closer, his voice steady. Zyra, you don't have to fight anymore. The war is over. We were sent here to offer you peace, to ask for your forgiveness. We were wrong, and we are ready to make things right. Zyra's heart raced as she listened to his words. Peace, forgiveness. She didn't know if she was ready for either. For so long she had been a warrior. She had never known anything else. Now she was being asked to let go of the only life she had ever known. I don't know if I can forgive, Zyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can forget the things we've done, the things I've done. Nodded, understanding. You don't have to forget, Zyra. You just have to stop fighting. You don't have to carry the weight of the past anymore. We can rebuild together. We can find a new path. Zyra stood in silence, the weight of his words sinking in. The battle within her was far from over, but for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of hope. She had spent so long fighting, so long surviving, but maybe, just maybe, there was another way. Ethan's voice broke through her thoughts. You don't have to decide now. Take your time. Whatever you choose, I'll be here. You don't have to do this alone. Zyra turned to look at him, her eyes softening. She had never expected to find peace with a human, let alone someone who cared for her. But in this moment, she realized that Ethan was the reason she had made it this far. He had given her the chance to heal, to find something better than war. The enemy soldiers, including Yarick, were still waiting, their weapons lowered, their expressions hopeful. They weren't here to fight. They were here to rebuild. But Zyra wasn't sure if she could trust them. She wasn't sure if she could trust anyone, even herself. But one thing was clear. She couldn't go back to the life she had known. The war, the violence, the endless fighting. It had taken so much from her. She had fought for so long. But now she realized that peace didn't come through more battles. It came through understanding, through trust, through letting go of the past. I can't promise you forgiveness, Zyra said, her voice strong, despite the uncertainty in her heart, but I'll try. I'll try to find a way forward. I'll try to rebuild. Yarick nodded, his face filled with relief. That's all we asked, Zyra. A chance. A chance to move forward, together. Zyra took a deep breath, looking at Ethan, then at Yarick, and finally at the group of soldiers who had once been her enemies. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, she felt like she was standing on solid ground. She wasn't alone. Anymore, she had people around her, people who cared. She wasn't just a warrior anymore. She was someone who could choose her own path. And that was something she had never thought possible. The night fell, and the stars shone brightly above them. The sounds of the forest were calm, the air crisp with the promise of a new beginning. The war was over. The past was behind her. And whatever came next, Zyra knew that she would face it with a new strength. The strength to let go, to heal, and to move forward. Ethan smiled at her, his eyes full of hope. Zyra returned the smile, her heart lighter than it had been in years. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. And as they stood there together, the future felt wide open, full of possibilities they had never imagined.